What's your take on the, let's say, heated H-1B visa debate that's going on online and legal immigration in general?
Yeah, so start by saying I am not involved in any aspect of government policy on this. I am not planning to be. This is not an issue that I'm working on or that I.
And just to give some context on why he would even say this, it's because he's been indirectly involved with a lot of these different presidencies prior, and he just has a lot of knowledge and understanding of how things work actually in the back room, and the back doors and the closed doors, and how sometimes behind closed doors conversations are different than the ones out in public, which we all know about. How many times do you guys talk with your coworkers about a certain boss or whatnot, and then when a meeting happens and you guys talk about a person, the tone and the rhetoric completely changes.
I'm going to work on. We're not. This is not part of the agenda of what the firm is doing. So, my firm is doing. So, like, I'm not in this in the new administration or the government. I'm not planning to be. So, purely just personal opinion. So, I would say I would describe Sav as a complex or nuanced, hopefully nuanced view on this issue that's maybe a little bit different than what a lot of my peers have. And I think, and I kind of thought about this, I didn't say anything about it all the way through the big kind of debate over Christmas, but I thought about it a lot and read everything. I think what I realized is that I just have a very different perspective on some of these things. And the reason is because of the combination of where I came from and then where I ended up. Let's start with this. Where I ended up, Silicon Valley. So, and I have made the high skilled immigration argument many, many times, the H-1B argument many times. In past lives, I've been in DC many times arguing with prior administrations about this, always on the side of trying to get more H-1Bs and trying to get more high skilled immigration. And, I think that argument is very strong and very solid and very, has paid off for the U.S. in many, many ways. And we can go through it, but I think it's the argument everybody already knows, right? It's like the stock. You take any Silicon Valley person, you press the button, and they tell you why we need to brain drain the world to get more H-1Bs, right? So everybody kind of gets that argument.
So it's basically, just to summarize, it's a mechanism by which you can get super smart people from the rest of the world, import them in, keep them here to increase the productivity of the U.S. companies.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much been the standard quote, what it feels like since the 90s, since I've been born. All the smartest people, all the best doctors, all the best lawyers, if they're not from America originally, which most of the time they're not, they're from another country out in Europe. Maybe it's India, China, I don't know, Sweden. And then they come over here for their formal studies, get the doctorate, and then start practicing here in America. So it's like we're almost siphoning all of the world's smartest people away from their countries and their people and exporting it here.
And then it's not just good for them, and it's not just good for Silicon Valley or the tech industry. It's good for the country because they then create new companies and create new technologies and create new industries that then create many more jobs for Americans, native-born Americans, than would have previously existed. And so it's a positive sum flywheel thing where everybody wins. Like everybody wins. There are no trade-offs. It's all absolutely glorious in all directions. There cannot possibly be a moral right argument against it under any circumstances. Anybody who argues against it is obviously doing so from a position of racism.
Yeah.
Is probably a fascist and a Nazi, right? Right. I mean,
right.
That's the thing. And like I said, I've made that argument many times. I'm very comfortable with that argument. And then I'd also say, look, I would say, number one, I believe a lot of it. I'll talk about the parts I don't believe, but I believe a lot of it. And then the other part is, look, I benefit every day. I always describe it as I work in the United Nations. Like my own firm and our founders and our companies and the industry, and my friends, are just this like amazing, panoply cornucopia of people from all over the world. And I've worked, I don't know at this point where people from, it's gotta be, 80 countries or something.
Damn.
Hopefully over time it'll be, the rest as well. And, it's been amazing, and they've done many of the most important things in my industry, and it's been really remarkable. So that's all good. And then, there's just the practical version of the argument, which is we are the main place these people get educated anyway, right? The best and the brightest tend to come here to get educated. And so, this is the old kind of Mitt Romney staple agreement.
If you hold an MBBS degree from India, then you have to give an exam. What do you mean by that?
Card to every, at least, maybe not every university degree, but every technical degree. Maybe the sociologists we could quibble about, but, the roboticists for sure, we can all agree that
at least I won you over on something today.
No, I'm exaggerating for effect. So,
and I lost you. I had you for a second.
I haven't gotten to the other side of the argument yet.
Okay, thank you.
So surely we can all agree that we need to staple a green
The
card.
roller coaster's going up.
The roller coaster is ratcheting slowly up. So, so surely we can all agree that the roboticists should all get green cards. And again, there's a lot of merit to that. Obviously, look, we want the U.S. to be the world leader in robotics. What's step one to being the world leader in robotics is have all the great robotics people, right? Like, very unlike the underpants. No,
Very fair.
it's like a very straightforward formula, right?
Yeah.
All right, that's all well and good. All right, but it gets a little bit more complicated because there is a kind of argument that's sort of right underneath that you also hear from these same people, and I have made this argument myself many times, which is we need to do this because we don't have enough people in the U.S. who can do it otherwise. Right? We have all these unfilled jobs. We've got all these companies that wouldn't exist. We don't have enough good founders. We don't have enough engineers. We don't have enough scientists.
I completely disagree with this notion. I think America has plenty of smart young men and women who could be the next best doctor, lawyer, mathematician, philosopher. There's just no there's no incentive for them to do this in America, because if they're just somebody who's born here in America and they're I don't want to say it, but one of the major majority races here, there's no incentive for them to go up, especially if there's a male in the past 4 years. You've been incentivized to kind of just stay the standard quo. And if anything, it's like the tall poppy syndrome, where if you stick your head up and you go against the grain, recently there's been an oppression of like, no, just stay where you're at. So that's where I think there's been plenty of people who are willing to grow and be big. They're just going to do the standard quo because they're not willing to get their head chopped off. And I don't blame them.
Or then the next version of the argument below that is our education system is not good enough to generate those people. And which is a weird argument, by the way, because like our education system is good enough for foreigners to be able to come here preferentially in like a very large number of cases, but somehow not good enough to educate our own native born people. So there's like a weird...
That's fair.
There's little cracks in the matrix that you can kind of stick your fingernail into and kind of wonder about. And we'll come back to that one. But like, at least, yes, our education system has its flaws. And then underneath that is the argument that, Vivek made, which is, we have cultural rot in the country, and, native born people in the country aren't, don't work hard enough and spend too much time watching TV and TikTok.
I understand where Vivek is coming from, but I think a lot of these people have just been defeated because they've gone out to be ambitious or to be entrepreneurial in the past, and they have failed, not because of their merit, but because of all the things that are around it due to woke culture and everything leading up to that.
And don't spend enough time studying differential equations.
Especially in my generation, right before the big wokeness, we were trying to recover from the 2008 housing crisis. So there was a lot of like depression, anxiety. People are wondering how they're going to make it. So when you're in that situation, you're not even thinking about how can you thrive and get ahead. You're just trying to survive. And then once you kind of get out of that, this whole woke culture where a man could be a woman and compete in women's sports, but then if you try to say that that's unfair against women, now you're a bigot or you're a Nazi because you're not seeing from my point of view. It just, this whole past 10 years has just been so demoralizing for a lot of native-born Americans who want to succeed.
And again, it's like, all right, like, yeah, there's a fair amount to that. Like, there's a lot of American culture that is, there's a lot of frivolity. There's a lot of, look, I mean, we have well-documented social issues on many fronts, many things that cut against having a culture of just like straightforward high achievement and effort and striving.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, those are the basic arguments. But then I have this kind of other side of my, kind of personality and thought process, which is, well, I grew up in a small farming town in rural Wisconsin, the rural Midwest. And, it's interesting. There's not a lot of people who make it from rural Wisconsin to, high tech. And so it's like, all right, why is that exactly? Right. And I know I'm an aberration. Like I was the only one from anybody I ever knew who ever did this. Right. I know what an aberration I am, and I know exactly how that aberration happened. And it's a very unusual, set of steps, including, many that were just luck.
That's how most aberrations are formed. Just a series of unusual steps.
But like there is in no sense a talent flow from rural Wisconsin into high tech, like not at all. There is also, like, in no sense a talent flow from the rest of the Midwest into high tech. There is no talent flow from the South into high tech. There is no flow from the Sun Belt into high tech. There is no flow from, the Deep South into high tech. Like, it just, like, literally, it's like the blank spot. There's this whole section of the country.
Well, it's just because I feel like in those communities, the idea is just it's so internal within the community. You're not thinking about big world ideas. You're just thinking about how you're going to fit within this community. You're almost like a fish inside of a bowl, and this is your whole world, and this is as far as you can think. You don't even think it's a possibility for you to swim in a big pond and find yourself at a coral reef, you know?
Just where the people just like for some reason don't end up in tech. Now, that's a little bit strange because these are the people who put a man on the moon. These are the people who built
Supposedly.
the World War II war machine. These are the people,
Factual.
at least their ancestors are the people who built the Second Industrial Revolution and built the railroads and built the telephone network,
Also
network, and
factual.
built, you know, logistics and transportation in the auto industry. I mean, the auto
Yeah, you
industry
gotta
was
pick
built in
one, right?
Cleveland and Detroit. And so at least these people's parents and grandparents and great grandparents somehow had the wherewithal to like build all of this like amazing things, invent all these things. And then there's many, 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 many stories in the history of American invention and innovation and capitalism where you had people who grew up in the middle of nowhere, Philo Farnsworth who invented the television, and just like, you know, tons and tons of others, endless stories like this. Now you have a puzzle, right? And a conundrum, which is like, okay, like what is happening on the blank spot of the map? And then, of course, you also can't help noticing that the blank spot on the map, the Midwest, the South, you've also just defined.
You're neither right or left. I like to stay in the gray area because I feel like the gray mindset is decreasing in the world. Wokeness is good, but the extreme version is bad. Wokeness is good. Let's break this down a little bit further. Can you talk to me about how is it good? Feminism is good, but it's not the extreme. Okay,
Trump
break
country.
this down.
Mhm.
Because are you just saying that the idea of being open-minded and that you know, like women should be on equal playing grounds as men? I think what you're saying. I think you're right. I think the idea of like diversity, inclusion, about having all different, you know, cultures coming together, working together, bringing the best of their culture and applying it to a you know, to a task, to a job, to a team is a good thing. I agree. But what I disagree with is the government forcing it. I think meritocracy should naturally allow that to happen, because if you allow meritocracy to naturally work its way, meaning the cream rises to the top, right? The people who are good, who do lead in these fields, are going to be the leading experts in these fields. And I think those people look all different kinds of human, whether they be black, whether they be white, whether they be Hispanic, whether they be Indian or Asian, whether they be man, woman, gay, straight, whatever. I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. But when it's forced to a T and it's saying that, hey, now I believe this way, you cannot think differently against me, obviously that's bad. And that's what you mean by the extremes. And the extremes on both sides are bad. You're right. So even here on the MAGA side, the Trump side, the quote unquote right, you got to look and be like, hey, there's got to be a point in time, not a point in time, but if there is a point in time where you start seeing the rhetoric turn to being too inflammatory, too oppressive, subjective, or subjective and subjugating other people, then obviously we got to call that out.
The Trump voter base, right? It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. Like, how did that happen? Right. And so either you really, really, really have to believe the very, very strong version of like the Vivek thesis or something, where you have to believe that like that basically culture, the whole sort of civilization in the middle of the country and the south of the country is so like deeply flawed, either inherently flawed or culturally flawed, such that for whatever reason they are not able to do the things that their, you know, parents and grandparents were able to do and that their peers are able to do, or something else is happening. Would you care to guess on what else is happening?
I mean, what, affirmative action?
Affirmative action. Okay, so this is very, think about it, this is very entertaining, right? What are the three things that we know about affirmative action? It is absolutely 100% necessary. But however, it cannot explain the success of any one individual.
Right.
Nor does it have any victims at all.
That could explain maybe disproportionate, but like it surely doesn't explain why you're probably the only person in Silicon Valley from Wisconsin.
What educational institution in the last 60 years has wanted farm boys from Wisconsin?
But what institution rejected farm boys from Wisconsin?
All of them.
All of them.
Of course. Okay, so we know this. We know this. The reason we know this is because of the Harvard and UNC Supreme Court cases. So this was like 3 years ago. These were big court cases. And, you know, because the idea of affirmative action has been litigated for many, many, many years and through many court cases. And the Supreme Court repeatedly in the past had upheld that it was a completely legitimate thing to do. And a lot of these, and there's basically two categories of affirmative action that like really matter, right? The one is the admissions into educational institutions, and then the other is jobs, right? Getting hired. Like those are the two biggest areas. The education one is like super potent, has been a super potent political issue for a very long time. For all, people have written and talked about this for many decades. I don't need to go through it. There's many arguments for why it's important. There's many arguments as to how it could backfire. It's been this thing, but the Supreme Court upheld it for a very long time. The most recent ruling, I'm not a lawyer, I don't have the exact reference in my head, but there was a case in 2003 that said that Sandra Day O'Connor famously wrote that although it had been 30 years of affirmative action, and although it was not working remotely as it had been intended, she said that basically we need to try it for another 25 years. But she said basically as a message to future Supreme Court justices, if it hasn't resolved basically the issues it's intended to resolve within 25 years, then we should probably call it off. By the way, we're coming up on the 25 years. It's a couple years away. The Supreme Court just had these cases. It was a Harvard case and I think a University of North Carolina case. And what's interesting about those cases is the lawyers in those cases put a tremendous amount of evidence into the record of how the admissions decisions actually happen at Harvard and happen at UNC. And it is like every bit as cartoonishly garish and racist as you could possibly imagine, because it's a ring of power. And if you're an admissions officer at a private university or an administrator, you have unlimited power to do what you want, and you can justify any of it under any of these rules or systems. And up until these cases, it had been a black box where you didn't have to explain yourself and show your work. And what the Harvard and USC cases did is they basically required showing the work. And so there was like all kinds of like phenomenal detail. I mean, number one is there were text messages in there that will just curl your hair of students being spoken of, and just like crude racial stereotypes that would just make you want to jump out the window.
Countered back at them.
It's horrible stuff. But also there was statistical information. And of course, the big statistical kicker to the whole thing is that at top institutions, it's common for different ethnic groups to have different cutoffs for SAT that are as wide as 400 points. Right. So different groups. So specifically Asians need to perform at 400 SAT points higher than other ethnicities in order to actually,
because they're so much smarter than everybody,
to get admitted into these. I mean, it's not even about, white people are a part of this, but like Asians are like a very big part of this. And actually the Harvard case was actually brought by an activist on behalf of actually the Asian students who were being turned away. And it's basically, it's the cliche now in the Valley and in the medical community, which is like, if you want a super genius, you hire an Asian from Harvard.
Yeah.
Because they are guaranteed to be freaking Einstein. Because if they weren't, they were never getting admitted.
Yeah.
Right. Almost all the qualified Asians get turned away.
That's insane.
So they've been running this. It's very, very
smart.
explicit.
Yeah, you guys have a complete culture based, or at least from a Western POV. Maybe this is some propaganda, but it definitely seems like the culture there way more focused on school and high performance in school.
Very clear program. This, of course, has been a third rail of things that people are not supposed to discuss or under any circumstances.
Like a high standard.
The thing that has really changed the tenor on this
high
is, I
standard
think,
here
two
is the
things.
anomaly.
Number one, those Supreme Court cases, the Supreme Court ruled that they can no longer do that. I will tell you, I don't believe there's a single education institution in America that is conforming with the Supreme Court ruling. I think they're all flagrantly ignoring it. And we could talk about that.
Mostly because of momentum, probably, or what?
They are trying to make the world a better place. They are trying to solve all these social problems. They are trying to have diverse student populations. They are trying to live up to the expectations of their donors. They are trying to make their faculty happy. They are trying to have their friends and family think that they're good people.
Right.
They're trying to have the press write nice things about them. Like, it's nearly impossible for them. And to be clear, like, nobody has been fired from an admissions office for 25 years of prior what the Supreme Court now has ruled to be illegality. And so they're all the same people under the exact same pressures. And so, the numbers are moving a little bit, but I don't know anybody in the system who thinks that they're complying with the Supreme Court. Like, who's in charge in the rank ordering of who rules who? The universities rule the Supreme Court way more than the Supreme Court rules the universities. Right. Well, another example of that is is that every sitting member of the Supreme Court right now went to either Harvard or Yale. Right. Like the level of incestuousness here is anyway. So.
And that just goes to show what he's saying. Incestuousness here is like, if you're not in Harvard or you're not in Yale, and let's say you went to like MIT or another Ivy League school, it's not allowed to. You're not allowed, but it's like an unspoken rule that it's so much harder for you to get involved in these circles, and it's supposedly you're not getting in these circles unless you came from a certain Ivy League school. It's not propaganda. It's true. We get punished for getting a bad score in childhood, not those timeout shit. Yeah.
So there's that, and so this has been running for a very long time. So one is the Harvard and UNC cases kind of.
Don't tell me it's like waterboarding,
or at least showed what the mechanism was. And then number two, the other thing is obviously the aftermath of October 7th, right? And what we discovered was happening with Jewish applicants. And what was happening at all the top institutions for Jewish applicants was they were being managed down, they were being actively managed down as a percentage of the base.
Damn.
Let's say I've heard reports of like extremely explicit, basically plans to manage the Jewish admissions down to their representative percentage of the U.S. population, which is 2%. And you know, there's a whole backstory here, which is 100 years ago, Jews were not admitted into a lot of these institutions, and then there was a big campaign to get them in. Once they could get in, they immediately became 30% of these institutions.
Why does everyone hate the Jews?
Because there's so many smart, talented Jews. So it went from 0%
Because there's so many smart, talented Jews? There's no way.
to 30%, and then the most recent generation of leadership has been trying to get it down to 2%. And a lot of Jewish people, at least a lot of Jewish people I know, sort of, they kind of knew this was happening, but they discovered it the hard way after October 7th, right? And so all of a sudden, so basically the Supreme Court case meant that you could address this in terms of the Asian victims. The October 7th meant that you could address it in terms of the Jewish victims. And for sure, both of those groups are being systematically excluded, right? And then, of course, there's the thing that you basically can't talk about, which is all the white people are being excluded. And then it turns out it's also happening to Black people. And this is the thing that like blew my freaking mind when I found out about it. So I just assumed that like this was great news for like American Blacks, because like, you know, obviously if, you know, whites, Asians, and Jews are being excluded, then, you know, the whole point of this in the beginning was to get
the different SEC score for different ethnicities is very similar to our country based on quota in the education system.
the Black population up. And so this must be great for American Blacks. So then I discovered this New York Times article from 2004 called Blacks Are Being Admitted into Top Schools at Greater Numbers, but which ones?
Uh-oh.
And again, and by the way, this is in the New York Times. This is not in like, you know, whatever, National Review. This is New York Times. New York Times. New York Times article from 2004 called Blacks Are Being Admitted into Top Schools at Greater.
At the most recent union of Harvard University's Black alumni, there was lots of place to talk about the increase of number of Black students at Harvard, but the celebratory mood was broken in the one forum when the speaker brought up the thorny issue of exactly who those Black students were. While 8% were above or about 530 of Harvard's undergraduates were Black, Lene Gunner, a Harvard law professor, and Henry Louis Gates, the chairman of Harvard's African and African American Studies, pointed out that the majority of them, perhaps as 2/3, were West Indian and African immigrants or their children, or at a lesser extent, the children are biracial couples. That said, they said only about 1/3 of the students of families which were all 4 grandparents were born in this country, descendant of slaves. Many argue that the students like these are disadvantaged by the legacy of Jim Crow laws, segregation, and decades of racism, poverty, and inferior schools, who were intended as a principal beneficiaries of affirmative action in the university and admissions.
Greater
Fascinating.
Numbers. 2004. And the 2 authorities that were quoted in the story are Henry Louis Gates, who's the dean of the African American Studies, you know, community in the United States, super brilliant guy, and then Lani Guinier, who was a potential Supreme Court appointee under, I think, she was a close friend of Hillary Clinton, and there was for a long time she was on the short list for Supreme Court. So one of the top, you know, jurists, lawyers in the country, both Black. Sort of legendarily successful in the academic and legal worlds, and Black, and they are quoted as the authorities in this story. And the story that they tell is actually it's amazing. And by the way, it's happening today in education institutions, and it's happening in companies, and you can see it all over the place, and the government. Which is, at least at that time, the number was half of the Black admits into a place like Harvard were not American-born Blacks; they were foreign-born Blacks. Specifically Northern African, generally Nigerian, or West Indian. Right. And by the way, many Nigerians and Northern Africans have come to the U.S. and have been very successful. Nigerian Americans as a group, like, way outperform. They're, you know, this is a super smart cohort of people. And then West Indian Blacks in the U.S. are incredibly successful. Most recently, by the way, Kamala Harris, as well as Colin Powell, like, just 2 sort of examples of that.
Even though Kamala Harris does get dunked on for her being a Indian Black woman coming up and being, you know, like the head prosecutor for the United States, that does show some segue and some big movements for the minorities here in America. There has to draw some inspiration, right? Like, dunk on her for saying some stupid shit, but for what she did to get there is impressive.
And so basically what Henry Louis Gates and Lonnie Grenier said in the story is Harvard is basically struggling
Tulsi Gabbard is better though in every way.
to either whatever it was,
Better
identify,
representation.
recruit, make successful, whatever it was, American-born Native blacks. And so therefore they were using high skill immigration as an escape hatch to go get blacks from other countries. And then this was 2004 when you could discuss such things. Obviously that is a topic that nobody has discussed since. It has sailed on. All of the DEI programs of the last 20 years have had this exact characteristic. There's large numbers of black people in America who are fully aware of this and are like, it's obviously not us that are getting these slots. We're literally competing with people who are being imported.
So the caste system, you guys are having the same issue because you're asking, like, did I know that the higher caste people or people who are up in the caste system need to get a higher score to get into the same school where lower people or people of a lower caste, excuse me, not a lower people, but it's just the people of a lower caste have to get kind of like the Asians to everyone else here, to like the white person, that the Asian has to perform 400 times better to get admitted than the other, it's other competitors, to say the least.
And if you believe in the basis of affirmative action, you are trying to make up for historical injustice of American black slavery. And so the idea that you import somebody from, Nigeria that never experienced that, is like tremendously insulting to black Americans. Anyway, so you can see where I'm heading with this. We have been in a 60-year social engineering experiment to exclude native-born people from the educational slots and jobs that high-skilled immigration has been funneling foreigners into. Right.
Which erodes at the confidence for native-born people to excel in this program, because even if they try to excel, they're not going to get admitted. People from another country are going to get the benefits. That's what I've been trying to say. This guy articulates it so well.
And so it turns out it's not a victim-free thing. There's
like your country's ethnicity system.
Why? There's only so many. For sure, there's only so many educational
system,
slots.
but I'm picking
for sure,
up what
there's
you're
only
putting down.
So many of these jobs. Right. Google only hires so many, whatever level 7 engineers. Right. And so that's the other side of it. Right. And so you're a farm boy in Wisconsin, right? Or a, black American whose ancestors arrived here, on a slave ship 300 years ago in Louisiana, or a, Cambodian immigrant in, the Bronx, and your kid, or a Jewish immigrant, or from a very successful Jewish family, and, your entire, for 3 generations, you and your parents and grandparents went to Harvard. And what all of those groups know is the system that has been created is not for them. Right. It's designed.
Holy shit. Exactly what I'm saying.
Specifically to exclude them.
Yes,
and then what happens is all of these tech people show up in public and say, yeah, let's bring in more foreigners. Right. And so anyway, so the short version of it is you can't anymore, I don't think, just have the quote high skilled immigration conversation for either education or for employment without also having the DEI conversation. And then underneath, and then DEI is just another word for affirmative action. So it's the affirmative action conversation. And you need to actually deal with this at substance and to see what's actually happening to people you need to join these topics. And I think it is much harder to make the moral claim for high skilled immigration given the extent to which DEI took over both the education process and the hiring process.
Okay, so first of all, that was brilliantly laid out.
Literally.
The nuance of it. So just to understand, it's not so much a criticism of H-1B, high-skilled immigration. It's that there needs to be more people saying, yay, we need more American-born hires.
So I spent the entire Christmas holiday reading every message on this. And
it's not so much, at least to my interpretation, it's not even so much that. The competition is a great thing. If you want innovation, you want competition, whether it be in sports or in academics. And you want that within your country. Right, but if you're extracting it from all of these other countries, what is it going to do for those other countries? It's going to bring them down and bring yours up to a point where now there's going to be no more competition, and there's going to be growth and stagnant, and it's going to get real messy. And in honesty, you want your people to natively grow, get in there, get incentivized to grow and make your community the best that it can be, and they should be incentivized because they live in that community, and the other people from the other countries that live in those communities should want to stay in those communities, level them up. That way, not only is there competition now in sports, academics, and medicine and whatnot, but now there's actual competition in global markets, economy, just globally. There's a whole new level of competition, because it's almost seeming like America is literally just siphoning like human intelligence. I don't want to say human intelligence, but some type of like a human something, just the human knowledge, right? We're siphoning all of it to get here and stay here.
Saying anything, and what
Which
I was
isn't a bad thing for America,
which
but in the long
you know
run,
me
it
well enough
kinda
to know
is.
that's a serious level of
Yeah,
willpower.
that's very zen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. No, it wasn't. There was tremendous rage on the other side of it, but
Sure.
I suppressed it. So I was waiting for the dog that didn't bark, right? And the dog that didn't bark was I did not, and you tell me if you saw one, I did not see a single example of somebody pounding the table for more high school immigration who was also pounding the table to go get more smart kids who are already here into these educational institutions and into these jobs. I didn't see a single one.
Yeah,
That's true.
This is
I
important.
think I agree with that. There really was a divide.
But it was like literally, it was like the proponents of high skilled immigrant. And again, this
Understood,
was me
Dominic.
for a very long time. I mean, I kind of took myself by surprise on this because I was on, you know, I had the much, say, simpler version of the story for a very, and like I said, I've been in Washington many times under past presidents lobbying for this. By the
I
way,
did.
never made any progress, which we could talk about. Like it never actually worked. But you know, I've been on the other side of this one, but I was literally sitting there being like, all right, which of these like super geniuses, who, you know, many of whom, by the way, are very, you know, successful high skilled immigrants or children of high skilled immigrants, you know, which of these super geniuses are going to like say, actually, we have this like incredible talent source here in the country, which again, to be clear, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about native born Americans, whites, Asians, Jews, blacks,
What was I just saying?
for sure. Those four groups.
Listen
But
to
also
this.
Yes.
white people.
Yeah. And also white people.
People that are making the case for American-born hires are usually not also supporting H-1B. It's an extreme divide, and those people that are making that case are often
This is true. This is the extremes where it's like, no, we need to focus on American-born hires, not on the immigrants. But at the same time, you want healthy, legal immigration. You still want people who love America, who want to do good in America, to come to America. Just like if you're any other country, you still want a process and a fair process to get people who can do good for your country into your country.
not making it in a way that's like making it in quite a radical way.
Yeah.
Let's put it this
Yeah.
way.
But you have this interesting thing. You have a split between the sides that I've noticed, which is one side has all of the experts.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
I'm using scare quote for people
Yep.
listening to audio. I'm making quotes in the air with my fingers as
Yep.
vigorously as I can.
Yep.
What's my personal opinion then? I mean, my personal opinion is that we in America, we can't just throw the baby with the bathwater. So is the immigration issue a problem? Absolutely. But does that mean we need to have completely closed borders? Absolutely not. America was definitely built on the back of immigration. So I would like to see an immigration reform to where it's just easier for people, or a simplified way for people to come in here. Not saying that it's an easier way, but a simplified way where the standard is the standard to be an American citizen. You got to come in here. You got to produce. You got to assimilate. You got to want a part of the American culture, right? You could bring the best of your culture too, but leave all the crap that you're trying to leave and only bring the good. That's my viewpoint on immigration. Now, when it comes to the people who are natively born here, this is what I was saying earlier. I think there's plenty of smart, hardworking people who can change the world for the better in America. But the ones who have been born here, at least in the 90s and the early 2000s, there's been like the system has actively been working against you. And that's what we've been learning in this video.
One side has all the certified experts. The other side just has a bunch of people who are like, they know that something is wrong and they don't quite know how to explain it. And what was so unusual about the Harvard UNC cases, by the way, in front of the Supreme Court, is they actually had sophisticated lawyers for the first time in a long time actually put all this evidence together and actually put it in the public
What's up,
record.
Arma?
They actually had experts, which is just really rare. Generally, what you get is because if you don't have experts, what do you have? You know something is wrong, and you have primarily an emotional response. You feel it, but can you put it in the words and tables and charts, that a certified expert can? And no, you can't. Like that's not who you are. That doesn't mean that you're wrong, and it also doesn't mean that you have less of a moral stance. And so it's just like, all right. Now, by the way, look, I think there are ways to square the circle. I think there's a way to have our cake and eat it too. Like I think there'd be many ways to resolve this. I think the way to do it is to look at these issues combined. Look at DEI.
Look at holistically. It's not, these two things are not two separate boxes. They're all together in one vacuum. And we need to look at this holistically as Americans.
Combined with high school immigration. It so happens that DEI is under much more scrutiny today than it has been for probably 20 years. Affirmative action is. The Supreme Court did just rule that it is not legal for universities to do that. They are still doing it, but they should stop.
That they should.
And then
There will be lawsuits.
are more and more, you've seen more companies now also ditching their DEI programs.
Yeah.
In part,
Most notably Target.
that's happening for a bunch of reasons, but it's happening in part because a lot of corporate lawyers will tell you that the Supreme Court rulings in education either already apply to businesses, or it just is a clear foreshadowing. The Supreme Court will rule on new cases that will ban it in businesses. And so
And you're telling me the businesses actually don't care about the policies at all? They just care about making sure that they don't get sued and just maximizing profits? It's crazy. The corporations, they never cared about any of these rights. They never cared about any of the activists. They just never wanted to get sued. They never wanted to pay for anything. They never wanted to have to, they never wanted to have to pay out for anything, and they want to maximize profits.
There's a moment here to be
head
able to look
combined.
at this on both sides.
Have I ever acted?
Let me add one more nuance to it, though, that makes it even more complicated.
Yeah.
So the cliche is we're going to brain drain the world, right? You've heard that? We're gonna take all the smart people from all over the world. We're gonna bring them here. We're gonna educate them, and then we're gonna keep.
Ooh, I think this is exactly what I was bringing up earlier. Is like we're brain draining the world, meaning that we're siphoning all of the intellectual human data from the world and bringing it to America. And if it only stays in America and we can't compete or grow with anything else, we're gonna get stagnant, and there's gonna be a hard cap on innovation.
Them, and then they're going to raise their families here, create businesses here, create jobs here, right?
In the cliche, that's a super positive thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, what happens to the rest of the world?
They lose.
I think you got your facts wrong, Omni.
How fungible are people? How many highly ambitious, highly conscientious, highly energetic, high achieving, high IQ super geniuses are there in the world? And if there's a lot, that's great. But if there just aren't that many, and they all come here, and they all aren't where they would be otherwise, what happens to all those other places? So it's almost impossible for us here to have that conversation, in part because we become incredibly uncomfortable as a society talking about the fact that people aren't just simply all the same, which is a whole thing we could talk about. But it also, we are purely the beneficiary of this effect, right? We are brain draining the world, not the other way around. There's only 4. So if you look at the flow of high skill immigration over time, there's only 4 permanent sinks of high skill immigration places people go. It's the U.S., Canada, the UK, and Australia. It's the
what? Australia.
It's 4 of the five eyes. It's the major Anglosphere countries. And so
what is the Anglosphere country? I didn't even realize that. That's fascinating to me.
So for those countries, this seems like a no-lose proposition.
Yeah, why?
It's all the other countries that basically what we 4 countries have been doing is draining all the smart people out. It's actually much easier for people in Europe to talk about this, I've discovered, because the Eurozone is 28 countries, and within the Eurozone, the high-skilled people over time have been migrating to originally the UK, but also specifically, I think it's the Netherlands, Germany, and France. But specifically, they've been migrating out of the peripheral Eurozone countries. And the one where this really hit the fan was in Greece, right? So, Greece falls into chaos, disaster, and then, you're running the government in Greece and you're trying to figure out how to put an economic development plan together. All of your smart young kids have left. Like, what are you going to do, right? By the way, this is a potential, I know you care a lot about Ukraine. This is a potential crisis for Ukraine, not because, in part because of this, because we enthusiastically.
Well, they did have a comedic, Jesus Christ, a stand-up comedian become president there.
Enthusiastically recruit Ukrainians, of course. And so we've been brain draining Ukraine for a long time. But also, of course, war does tend to cause people to migrate out. And so, when it comes time for Ukraine to rebuild as a peaceful country, is it going to have the talent base even that it had 5 years ago is like a very big and important question.
No, because they either migrated out or unfortunately they died.
By the way, Russia, like we have brain drained a lot of really smart people out of Russia. A lot of them are here, right?
Yeah.
Over the last, 30 years.
Shout out to Lex Friedman.
And so there's this thing. It's actually really funny if you think about it. Like the one thing that we know to be the height of absolute evil that the West ever did was colonization and resource extraction, right? So
colonization, but we're still doing the resource extraction. Now it's just on an intellectual basis.
We know the height of absolute evil was when the Portuguese and the English and, everybody else went and had these colonies and then went in and we, took all the oil or we took all the diamonds or we took all the whatever, lithium or whatever it is, right? Well, for some reason, we realized that that's a deeply evil thing to do when it...
America allowed... No, us as Americans, we did not allow that. That was the deep state that allowed Sleepy Joe. They woke him up and they said, you're president. He said, really? I won? They said, no, you didn't, but we're making sure that you did and do. to follow our orders, and that orange nasty man, he will not be in office again. Fast forward, he's back.
It's a physical resource, when it's a non-conscious physical matter. For some reason, we think it's completely morally acceptable to do it with human capital. In fact, we think it's glorious and beautiful and wonderful, and the great flowering of peace and harmony and moral justice of our time to do it. And we don't think for 1 second what we're doing to the countries that we're pulling all these people out of. And this is one of these things, like, I don't know, like, maybe we're just going to live in this delusional state forever, and we'll just keep doing it, and it'll keep benefiting us, and we just won't care what happens. But like, I think there may come, this is like one of these submarines under 10 feet under the waterline. Like, I think it's just a matter of time until people suddenly realize, oh my God, what are we doing? Because, like,
That's fair. No, that is fair. We are literally extracting all the smartest people away from the other countries. And if America itself doesn't have competition with these other countries, it will grow stagnant, it will grow fast, and a rolling stone grows no algae. And for a stone to have no reason to roll, it'll stop rolling. Momentum will stop it from rolling, and algae will grow. And us I think as a species, as a nation, will crumple, and we're just gonna set the world back. Like, if we're supposed to be the beacon of light, let's lead by example. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, then please like the video, subscribe, and if you really like it, then share it with some of your friends. My goal here is to spread a positive message while sprinkling my 2 cents on big topics like American, Indian, and world geopolitics, and even small stuff like Twitch drama and online debacles. And if you want to see it live, come join me over on Twitch. Twitch.tv/ActuallyElrod. That's where I'm going to do all my reactions, and after the reactions, that's where we get down a game. And if you're like, hey, I have a video that I want this dude to sprinkle his 2 cents on, then come over on my Discord and let me know and join the community there. And while we're at it, I have to say thank you to everybody who has made that Discord just so poppin'. I never thought I'd have a Discord that's so flowing. It's really cool to see. Shout out to you, Bobby, Omni, Demon, all of you who have been in there who are just super active. Logie, you're the man. Logie is the one who's like modding and helping run the server, so thank you, Logie. Lastly, I challenge you. I have a challenge for you. Make somebody laugh today. We all know there's enough hate and vitriol in the world. If energy is contagious like the flu, then let's spread and get everyone contagious with our positive energy, right? Not negative energy, because there's so much of that. And if we could just be a small little change in someone's day, then you never know. Maybe that's the thing that starts shifting this world to a happier, healthier, just better place. And with all of that said and done, thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.